Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Caro-Kann after e4, c6, d4, d5, knight c3, d takes c4, knight takes e4, and we're going to be taking a look at probably one of the most popular lines today, which is to play the Bronstein variation with knight f6, and then after knight f6 to take back with the e pawn. So if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please click that subscribe button, click on your notification icon. So one of the things that White has going for him here is White has a space advantage like he does in most Caro-Kanns. But in this case, it's actually very clear that White has a positional advantage, both short-term and long-term. He has the better center, which is a good short-term positional advantage, but he also has a 4-on-3 pawn majority on the queen side already, and there's no offsetting values for that. It's not like he doesn't have a bishop pair or something. Both sides still have a bishop pair. So White has both a short-term and a long-term advantage. Basically what Black is saying in these types of positions is he doesn't believe that White has enough to win the game. It is very clear that White has an advantage here. It's just not clear that White has enough of an advantage to win a game of chess. So how should we proceed here with White? What's the correct strategy? Well, the correct basic strategy is just to plant both the bishop and the queen on the light squares and try to elicit further concessions from Black. Basically try to get Black to push either his g-pawn or his h-pawn to create additional weak squares that White can then use to get an even larger advantage. Normally here Black will throw in this check. Almost everybody does it. They just love gaining this tempo. I don't know why. We were going to develop our knight anyway. I'm not sure that rook e8 is 100% necessary, but it is an open file. I guess it's always good to put your pieces on open files. So rook e8, knight e2 almost always gets played. And now they need to choose between h6, h5, and pawn to g6. And the strategy that White can employ against all three of these moves is going to be pretty close to the same. White can go about the strategy of just trying to break apart Black's kingside structure. But keep in mind, White also has a very simple strategy of just finishing his development, making solid moves, and simply having an advantage of having a 4-on-3, having an advantage of having a natural passed pawn on the queen side, if this does make it all the way to an endgame. So after pawn to g6, I honestly think the best move is just to go for broke and just try to break up the position of the pawns around the king pretty much immediately. So I would recommend something like h4, which was played in Shevchenko versus Mexuzla in 2017. Continued bishop e6, h5, just going after that breakup of the position. Pawn to f5, bishop e3, queen f6. We have castles queenside. And one important thing to note is it's almost always okay to castle queenside in these types of positions, even if the bishop can take on a2. Because we have two possible ways to trap that bishop on the a2 square. One is with pawn to b3, which is maybe the more obvious one. In some cases, bishop a3 check is a check that can be thrown in, especially if this bishop is on d2 instead of e3. But if you've developed the bishop to e3, you can just meet bishop a2 with b3, but you can also meet bishop a2 with pawn to c4 in either case, and that'll trap the bishop as well. So bishop a2 is almost never on the table. It's just not something you should be worried about, just in case you were worried about it. So normal here is something like knight d7, and then we're just simply going to play pawn to c4, just preventing that mechanically, and then b5, we're going to exchange, opening up the position of the black king, which was basically the goal, and then we're going to play c5, so again, no bishop a2 because we're getting a tempo, and again, if bishop a2, even on the next move, we're still going to trap that bishop with pawn to b3. So not something we need to spend a tempo defending against. So bishop c7, we're going to play rook h6, continuing to go after that king side, queen g7, retreating the rook, bishop d5, knight to c3, bishop g2, and now breaking up the position of the black king altogether, just bishop takes f5. And apparently there's just not a great move here. If they take it, probably even just taking back with the queen is going to be good enough. There's going to be a lot of threats here, and white should actually just be quite a bit better. The other option is the option that happened in the game. They actually played, after bishop takes f5, they played b4, but then the move knight b5 was apparently just completely winning. There's too much stuff hanging. If they take the bishop, we're taking on c7, and if they take the knight, we're taking on d7. And this all these complications just apparently work out great for white, and white has a huge advantage here, and white went on to win very easily. White's already up in exchange, and White's continuing to an attack. So White went on to win that game very easily. So going back to g6. There's two other options that get played quite a bit here. One is h6, and one is h5. So I recommend a very similar approach to each of these two options. So against h6, I again recommend bishop e3. So this is very similar to the last example. So after bishop e3, we're going to take a look at something like, say, bishop e6. And we've got a number of different options here. One of the simplest ones is we could simply castle. Keep in mind that we can play endgames in these positions. We have that 4 on 3. That 4 on 3 is not a big deal. Another way we can play this is like, let's say knight d7. We can castle queenside, knight f8. We could play c4, pawn to a6, king b1, bishop e6, knight to c3, bishop g4, rook d2. White just has a nice solid position. Nothing is wrong with White's position. There was a game that continued bishop h5, king a1, bishop b4, a3, queen a5, and this ended in a win for White. One example of how things could go extremely well from here would just be something simple like rook ac1, bishop c3, queen c3, queen c3, rook c3, and this endgame already is completely winning. Like, any exchanges into these types of endgames are going to be a winning position for White. In this case, it's a really good situation. White has the bishop pair, which I guess Black can get rid of. Black can play bishop g6 and get rid of that bishop pair. But here's the thing. d5, we exchange, and now we have a very easy pawn majority on the queen side. c4, b2, a3. We're going to simply push this pawn majority. b4, c5, etc. We have two rooks on a solid open file. We have a nice little anchored bishop, and these doubled pawns are terrible. So if we get to an endgame, even just a rook and pawn endgame or a bishop versus knight endgame, these endgames are nearly winning because we're able to create this outside passed pawn without a ton of difficulty. We have this traditional pawn majority that we're able to create a passed pawn with. So this is another strategy that White can use, just centralizes pieces very solidly, and he's not at all worried about exchanges. So that's kind of one of the easiest ways to handle the h6 move. What about how do we handle pawn to h5, which is of course another option? Well, here we can again play very similarly. We can just play bishop e3, knight d7, knight g3 going after that h5 pawn, knight f8. And now the normal here is just castles queenside. Now, we do have to be kind of careful about when and how we capture this pawn on h5. Sometimes there are tactics and there are tricks involving bishop g4, for example. So here they're going to play pawn to g6 to defend that pawn on h5 so we can't take it. Then we're going to play knight to e4, bringing that knight into the middle. Bishop e7, king b1, f5, knight back to d2, bishop e6. And then my recommendation is really simple, and it's also what was played in Mamedov versus Tikkanen, played in 2019, and that game continued with h3, b5, and then simply g4. Just breaking up the position of the black king, breaking up the pawns in front of the black king, and just playing for these sacrificial attacking ideas where we're just going to get a big attack and we're going to win. Now that game continued f takes g4, h takes g4, h takes g4, and then bishop f4. It was also possible to just try to continue just very brute force mechanical breakup with, say, f3 followed by rook on d to g1, and this also would have been a very strong position for White. But in the game it actually went really well. He played bishop f4, and then after bishop g5, after bishop e5, his position was nearly decisive. He's already threatening rook h8 mate, which Black has to stop with a move like pawn to f6. But then after pawn to f4, Black's whole position just completely starts falling apart. We have gf3, knight to f3 takes, and then bishop takes g6. And the black king is completely wide open. And there was apparently just no defense. After just a few more moves, Black was completely lost. White gets the piece back. And then Black just ends up being down a ton of material. And here, Black just felt the need to resign. He can't make a queen of his own, and he's just down a ton of stuff. He's down a whole rook in this position. So basically, those are the three options for Black. He's going to inevitably play his little rook e8 check. They all do. They're going to play their little rook e8 check move, and then they need to decide between h6, g6, and h5, and we're going to basically play about the same against all three of those moves. We're just going to try to break up the position of the pawns in front of the black king, and barring that, if we don't do that, if we just maintain the position and manage to exchange some pieces, we're going to have a better endgame because we have a 4-on-3 majority on the king side, and we'll be able to create a passed pawn. So that's how you play against what has now become like the most popular line in the Caro-Kann. I would say that what black is playing for is black is just trying to play for equality. He's trying to prove that white doesn't quite have enough to win, and white simply has a very solid, very steady advantage. And if you know what you're doing, it should be fairly easy to play the white pieces. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.